Aquanetta Betts has an impressive background. She is currently the Director of Planned Giving at George Mason University and is nationally recognized for her extensive experience, including her time as Senior Executive Director of Planned Giving at World Vision, and it speaks volumes of the work that she does in planned giving and estate planning. Her dedication to empowering advisors and enhancing charitable giving has made a lasting impact. Her leadership in organizations like the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners reflects her unwavering commitment to excellence and inclusivity. This evening, Aquanetta will guide us through a case study of Peter and Charlotte Cade, an African-American couple nearing retirement, navigating crucial decisions in wealth and estate planning. The case offers profound look into the intersection of wealth, legacy, race, systemic influences on family finances. So Aquanetta will share strategies to approach wealth planning with cultural competency, supporting families in achieving their charitable aspirations while honoring their unique histories and dreams. So please join me in welcoming Aquanetta. Let's save all of the questions until the Q&A portion of the event. And Aquanetta, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. First, I want to make sure that my phone is on silent. And I want to thank you all for the wonderful introduction. It's been just fantastic meeting so many wonderful folks in the first 30 or 40 minutes or so of this evening. I appreciate you all being here, and I do see a familiar face. It's just been great meeting you all. And Tanner, thank you so much. You all have just been fantastic putting this together. You've made it seamless for me to get here. I will share just a couple of things about my background. I know you have the bio, you've seen that coming through your email, but I am in Virginia at George Mason, and I'm there on campus perhaps once or twice a week. It's a bit of a hike for me. I live in Baltimore County. So 495, the beltway around that DC area, if you know, it is horrendous. So fortunately, I can do a lot of the work in meetings and virtual meetings as well. The one thing I will point out, and some of you may have heard this, I did hear it come up once in a conversation, just a little tidbit about me. I spent 15 years as a flight attendant for American Airlines. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, just to add a little bit more. Yeah, so it makes for an interesting topic sometimes. So I just thought I'd share that with you all. And I will go ahead and get into the story of Peter and Charlotte Cade. And we're going to save the questions for the end. And please feel free at that time to, ask away. But I will interject periodically with a few questions that I have for you all as we go through it. And I know it's evening, so I'll try to keep this as lively as I can. All right, there we go. So Peter and Charlotte Cade. I'm going to tell you a lot about this couple and their family. And so just hold on. I know it's in the evening time and it's late. You've worked all day. So just bear with us. There are case studies right in front of you. So Peter and Charlotte Cade, we're going to go through this case study. And by the time this case study has been presented, it's over, you've asked your questions, you should be able to go through a few of these objectives. One, identify some key concerns for this couple. They're approaching retirement. They have a business and some shares in ancestral properties. And also consider the role of systemic racism in impacting multi-generational family wealth. With that in mind, can I get a hand? How many folks in here are financial advisors, financial planners? Okay, pretty good group. How about accountants? I see 1, 2, maybe, okay. Perfect, yes, got it. How about estate planning attorneys? Okay, wonderful. Estate planning is my first love, so plan giving comes after that. But speaking of the generational family wealth and the planning that you all do, this will make a lot of sense as we go through this case study. Describe feasible options for this couple to meet their family obligations and their goals, among others. So here's a brief bio. I'm going to talk about this family a little bit, give you some factual background on this couple. So Peter is 64 years old. He's a retired Army veteran. He spent 29 years as a mechanic. He loves cars and anything that he can get up under the hood and work on cars and mechanics. He also owns and operates an auto repair shop in Georgia. I guess you're thinking, you're all the way in Colorado, you're talking about Georgia. It'll all come together. His wife, Charlotte, is 63 years old. She's a second grade teacher, and she's taught for years, and she loves teaching. Second grade is her favorite. Peter and Charlotte's family, they have one son, Langston, and a daughter, Zora. Zora, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago. We'll talk a little bit more about her story. They also have one teenage grandson, Emmett. Peter and Charlotte can trace their roots back to enslaved individuals born in the early 1800s. Charlotte and Peter, they met in Augusta, Georgia. He was 18 and she was 17. It was love at first sight. They knew they wanted to be together. Charlotte went away. She went away to college. Peter went away to the Army after high school. They did get married after she graduated from college. Peter knew right away that college was not for him. He was into the mechanics, and that's what he wanted to do most. Peter's family, they're from coastal Georgia, the Sea Islands. Anyone in here been to Sea Islands, the coast of Georgia? Yes, beautiful. So that's where his family is from. Charlotte's parents are retired employees. They live nearby. And Peter's parents, they are deceased. You'll see later on where the family component comes into play with this family. So they're giving, and I know we're here, the foundation, all these folks, we just had a spiel on some options for giving. So charitable giving is very important to this family. So how do they give? They give their church. It's very important. Peter and Charlotte give at least 10% of their income to the local church that they attend. Anyone in here, 10% right off the top of your head, tithing? In many families, that is a critical part of their giving. And oftentimes, and I will speak from an African American family standpoint, that 10% is right off the top of everything that comes into your household. You don't even think about it. But here's the thing. Many families, like Peter and Charlotte, even my family, that's not considered giving. Although it can be really significant when it comes to looking at their income, and that 10% comes off of that. Most people, like Peter and Charlotte, they would not consider themselves charitable in that way. It's ingrained really from the moment you understand what giving means, that 10% is there. They also support another church. It's a smaller church, a small rural town nearby where Charlotte and Peter live. So it's not their primary church, but it has a real family history significance for them. So Charlotte's considering starting a fund specifically for that smaller family church. Anyone in here have any thoughts about a fund, setting up a specific fund for this church? I'll give you a story. I received a call a couple years ago from one of my family members, and they said, hey, Aquanetta, there's a small church that mom went to, granddad went to. We had our annual homecoming events there in August. First Sunday in August can be real significant to a lot of families. People would go back to their small hometowns where they had left decades before. They would all meet up back at this small family church, the white steeple church, back on a dirt road oftentimes. They would have food outside. This was years ago. And they would all gather and meet folks who had moved away from their small town. So Charlotte's church is similar to this, the small family church. But she wanted to continue to exist. And their relatives have moved away from their small town. So how do they keep the funds going into their small family church if a lot of the folks have moved away? So Charlotte is considering her options for this small family church. More giving. So giving, of course, dollars and cents, obviously. That's certainly a way to give. But also there's the volunteer component. There's a lot of time and energy spent in volunteering. Sorority and HBCU. How many people in here know what an HBCU is? That is phenomenal, and I'll tell you why. I've done this presentation, this Cade family case study, for probably over a year and a half. When I started doing this, do you know how many people would raise their hand when I asked what was an HBCU? Maybe 2 to 3. Most of you in here raise your hand. So, Charlotte and Peter. Peter nor Charlotte's parents graduated college. So Charlotte is first generation. Charlotte wants to fund a scholarship to support college students who attend her alma mater, which is an HBCU. So a little bit of background on HBCUs. I did not graduate from an HBCU. Just about everyone in my family has some connection to an HBCU. I had a great uncle, maybe third grade. He was born in about 1890 something, I believe. He ended up going away to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, which is an HBCU. At the time, that's the only school he could go to, which is an HBCU. He graduated from Howard Medical School in about 1908. Well, he did great in his local community. He served the poor. He was known as the medical missionary. He would not charge indigent folks. His son, fast forward to about 1939 or so, his son Marion wanted to attend medical school, become a doctor just like his father. They went to the Medical College of Georgia, which was just about a mile or so walking distance from their home. They spoke to the dean. My great-great-uncle spoke to the dean and said, hey, you know, Marion, my son, has graduated college, great student, he wants to go to medical school. The dean said, we're not accepting black students. They didn't graduate a black student from the Medical College of Georgia until about 1971. So where did Marion go to medical school? He went to Meharry, which is in Nashville. It's also an HBCU. I bring this up because a lot of black families, African-American families, have a connection to an HBCU. That's the only place they could go. So if you wanted to be a doctor, a teacher, you had to go to an HBCU. There was no other way around it. So I wanted to point that out so you could understand, even though Aquanetta did not graduate from an HBCU, I support them. I always will. They allowed people in my family to become doctors. And the story about Marion, he went on to become the chief of anesthesiology at the Queen of Angels Hospital in Los Angeles, where he worked for over 30 years. So he saved lots of lives. That's the only place that would educate him, an HBCU. So I just wanted to point that out, the significance of these schools. So, Charlotte has been active with her sorority for years and serves on the fundraising committee. Another component, African American story, sororities, fraternities, they are for life. Usually we associate a sorority, you know, college, years. And it kind of dwindles out after that point. You certainly remember those days, but a lot of sororities and fraternities, fraternal organizations in the African American community, there were groups where folks could gather, they had networks, and they were able to share things that they were unable to share in other places. So that sort of connection, it still exists. It's a very important component for many families, sororities and fraternal organizations. More giving here. Cancer organizations, so Peter and Charlotte, they gave $5,000, or they give $5,000 each year to support the local cancer organization. Charlotte recently joined their board. Their daughter, Zora, which I said I'd mention her later, she actually passed away from breast cancer in her 30s. So there's a close connection there to cancer research. Other causes that they support, in addition to the 10% tithing, Peter and Charlotte also give an additional $10,000 total to Gullah Geechee events. Gullah Geechee, anybody in here? Gullah Geechee, you know what that means? Okay, perfect. We have some hands raised. Awesome. A few months ago, maybe a couple months ago, there was a horrific story in the news. It was one of the seacoast islands in Georgia, Sapelo, I believe that's how it's pronounced, S-A-P-E-L-O. They were celebrating on that island a Gullah Geechee festival. And the gangway from the, that will lead to the ferry, it actually collapsed and gave way. I think about 7 people perished. The youngest one that perished was in their 70s. I think the oldest was in her 90s. Gullah Geechee, the group of people of African descent, they their ancestors were brought over, and they were largely in this area on the southeastern US. And to this day, there's still a lot of cultural things that exist in these Gullah Geechee areas. Food, language, there's a dialect that I thought when I initially heard it, and I was born and raised in Georgia. I heard someone who grew up on one of these coastal islands. I didn't know where she was from, meaning I thought her accent was from somewhere outside of the US. It was that distinct. So Gullah Geechee, there are a lot of folks still to this day, they have family connections to Gullah Geechee. So it's a very important cultural aspect of American history, actually. They've managed to maintain some of the language, of course the food, all of that. So they have festivals every year, really highlighting their culture. But it's along the southern US. So now you know Gullah Geechee. Homecoming events at Charlotte's alma mater. She's still really closely connected to her school, the family church, and the local African American History Museum. Each year they give. So I will point out that there have been studies that shows African American families, blacks, give more of their income percentage-wise than any other group. And I raise that because giving is not a question. Many communities of color, they've had to rely on giving, community giving. So the charitable nature, that charitable spirit, it's deeply ingrained and embedded. But what's lacking, and you'll appreciate this, especially our estate planners, what's lacking, there's no plan for the giving. There's no strategy around the giving. Like I mentioned before, that 10%, they don't really consider that even giving. It's just something that they do. So giving is very, very deeply ingrained in Charlotte and Peter's family. So their son Langston, he's 35 years old. He's really independent. He's a commercial airline pilot. He's married to Maya, who's a flight attendant. They live in Dallas, Texas, and they do not yet have children. So that last point here, that should resonate with some folks in here when it comes to planning. If you think about their son, their daughter-in-law, but there are no grandchildren yet from Langston. So their daughter, Zora, of course, she died 3 years ago from breast cancer. She was in her 30s. And her son, Emmett. It's their only grandchild that Peter and Charlotte have, and they just adore this young man. He lives with them. He's 18 years old, and he is pursuing a mechanic's certificate or training at the local technical college. He wants to be a mechanic like his grandfather. He loves nothing more than to work on cars as well, so he has that from his grandfather. But what will Emmett do with the business? Peter owns a business, remember? Will Emmett take over the business one day? Any business plans there, succession planning? All right, the money story. Peter saves everything. He lives a very frugal lifestyle. Charlotte wishes he were different, but he's pretty frugal. He does not like debt. They paid off their 15-year mortgage, and he celebrated the day that it was paid in full. Charlotte's parents are aging, and they are in their home. Anyone priced long-term care facilities lately? Yeah, so fortunately her parents are still able to stay in their home, but they do have aides coming in, so there's a cost associated with that. And Peter and Charlotte are helping Charlotte's parents. And Peter and Charlotte are talking about retirement. So that's a lot to consider. So this family has a lot going on. So some of their assets, there's a Sea Island property. It is one of these Sea Islands. I did this presentation in Atlanta, and someone came up to me afterwards and they said, "Have you been to Sea Island, Georgia?" And I said, "Yes, I've been to Sea Island, Georgia." This property is not Sea Island, Georgia. Sea Island, Georgia is very exclusive. Yeah, you're nodding your heads, yeah. This is a property that is on one of these Sea Islands. There are multiple Sea Islands. So this property is valued at about $1 million for Peter's share, and it's a property that he inherited, his quarter or share of his grandparents' home. Heirs property, anybody familiar with heirs property in here? You heard the term? Yes, okay. So heirs property. A lot of families, in particular Southeast African-American families, some indigenous families, Hispanic families, there's an issue of heirs property. Heirs property, to simply put it, is usually when a property has multiple people with an interest in the property, because the property was not titled when someone passed away, it didn't go through probate. So it has all these people with an interest. There was a case that was settled a few years ago. There was a family, I believe, in South Carolina, and there were about 75 people who had an interest in one property. So grandma died, granddad died, great-grandparents died. No one had probated the property. So heirs property has been a huge issue in many families of color. There's a great documentary called Gaining Ground. If you get an opportunity to look it up, it was streaming on a couple of different channels, but it's called Gaining Ground. It was produced by John Deere and Al Roker's production company. They teamed up to produce this documentary. It's about farm land loss in the African American family. And in the early 1900s, African American families owned about 16 million acres of farmland. I'm not even talking about other types of land like coastal land, but just farmland. Early 1900s, about 16 million. How many acres of farmland do you think now African American families own? Anybody? 10,000? A million? It's at around, I've seen somewhere between 2 and 3 million. 16 million acres, early 1900s. And today, think about that per acre, the value of an acre of farmland. It's gone from these families. You're talking about generational wealth gap. So heirs property, it's a very, very significant piece of ownership, land ownership, and it has really wreaked havoc on a lot of families, African American families. So check out that documentary if you get the chance, Gaining Ground. I think you'll find it very insightful in the work that we all do. So that's Peter's share of that home. Retirement accounts, about $900K. Peter and Charlotte combined their IRA and their 403B. Their annual net income, $180. There's the teaching for Charlotte, the military pension, and the auto repair shop. And Peter has never had any sort of business valuation for this shop. He has no idea. He really doesn't care, because he just wants to tinker with the automobiles. So he doesn't really care about the business part of it. Maybe he should, right? Their residence of $400K, it was paid off, remember, the 15-year mortgage, and they paid $100K for it. So there's some equity there. So they're not high net worth folks. They're not ultra high net worth folks. But they worked hard, and they have some assets, and they need some planning bad. There's the auto repair, the building at $265. It's paid in full. Again, Peter does not like debt. But again, look what he paid for it. There's a car collection, 3 automobiles. There's farm and timberland, and this is what Charlotte has inherited. So she also has heirs property, and it's tied up with a long list of family members. Right now, there are 10 beneficiaries. So they need to get a clean title to this property, and maybe they can even leverage some of these assets to do some more planning, more giving even, and start preparing for their retirement with some of these assets. So interest in collecting cars, Peter specializes in vintage cars, and he also has someone that he has employed, Joe, who's a mechanic, who does most of that day-to-day operations, that business stuff that Peter doesn't want to deal with. He's been with Peter for about 10 years, and Peter primarily works on restoring those cars. Anyone ever heard of a shade tree mechanic? Yes, some nods in here, shade tree mechanic. Yeah, so we use that term a lot growing up where I was from. Someone you'd see outside on a hot summer day, and they're just up under this tree for shade, and there's a car there, probably an old busted up car that they're tinkering with. So we would call them shade tree mechanics. So that's what Peter really, really likes to do. Travel, Charlotte would love to plan a family trip for them to explore their roots. She's searching for more information on her genealogy and family history. Peter and Charlotte have always talked to their children about navigating biases and unjust treatment. Charlotte wishes to retire in a few years, and Peter wishes to reduce his hours in the business. I will share with you, it's in the case study, but Peter went to a bank, a national bank, to talk about a business loan before he purchased that building, and he wanted to open up the auto repair shop. He basically was told before he even filled out the application that he should think twice about it. Could he really afford that loan? Peter was pretty bothered by that. He ended up going to a local black-owned bank, owned and operated bank, and that's where he eventually got the loan. I bring that up because these stories are not uncommon for many people of color. To hear certain things, people are judging without even giving you an opportunity to share your information or your story. And in Peter's case, without giving him the opportunity to even apply. So they want to take care of her parents, that's another concern they have, and they want to also support those favored organizations. So, I have some questions here, and I know we will have time in just a few minutes for some Q&A, but there was a lot in that case study, right? There was a whole lot going on there. We could actually break it up into a few different case studies. But I do want to ask you all a question. Based on everything you've seen in here, all these details about this family, some of their challenges, what would your goal be on that first meeting if they came in to see you? What would your goal be? Yes.
So just kind of opening the door, I always try and kind of lay that groundwork and just ask them how they want this to go and just help them to get comfortable having the conversation. I think that's oftentimes half the battle, is just getting people to settle in and get comfortable and start to open up to you, because you can ask all the great questions in the world, but if they're not comfortable talking to you, or if they don't feel like you're really listening or hearing them, you're not going to get the information you need to give them good advice.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I heard the word I was really listening for, listening. So Peter and Charlotte, as you can tell, they've been through quite a bit. There are some challenges that they're navigating. Their family, they've navigated these challenges for decades and decades in their families. So listening to them, when I did this presentation before to a group at the Estate Planning Council in Atlanta, one of the advisors said very quickly, he said, I could crunch the numbers, put in a spreadsheet, that'd be the first meeting pretty much. And we all know you can do that. But the listening part is going to be key for this family. We have to listen to their stories. Trust is huge. You have to build that trust. And so listening, that ear, is going to be really, really important when working with Charlotte and Peter. And for a lot of families who've dealt with such challenges, just navigating life. Life is tough enough, but then you add in all these other things, and so it's even tougher for some. Thank you. All right, so financial and estate planning. Financial issues, they have a lot of financial issues. It looks like from what we've seen, they may need to leverage some of that property somehow. There's some real estate there. They need to clean up those titles. And there's some pretty significant pieces of real estate that they have. So they have quite a few financial issues. I'll bring up this one thing when it comes to retirement planning, and those of you who do a lot of retirement planning, I don't know if you thought about this, but I'll share it from the context or the standpoint of an African American. After COVID, they came out with, they as in whoever creates these actuarial tables for Americans. And in the past, it had always traditionally been whites had longer life expectancies. Blacks were lower life expectancy. So from the standpoint of preparing for retirement, Social Security is certainly a part of retirement planning for most of us. So if you're looking at an actuarial table and you're planning for retirement, you're African American, how long do you want to wait before you start taking your Social Security? You ever thought about it? Because everything's saying wait. Wait till you're what? 70 is ideal, right? For who? Think about it. Do I want to wait until most of my health, has started to leave me before I start getting my Social Security because I want to get a few more $100 a month? I don't know. It's something to think about. I raised that question to one of my family members, and she was just about to turn, for her, I think it was 62. And she told me later, she said, Aquanetta, you raised that question to me. She said, and I just never thought about it. And I'm enjoying my Social Security right now. So for her, it worked. It's not for everyone. But I just wanted to raise that. It can be an issue for some families. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. So financial issues, they certainly have lots of them. Estate planning issues, there's nothing in here that talked about whether or not Charlotte and Peter have an estate plan in place. They have a great grandson that they adore. They certainly want to put some things in place for him. Would there be a problem later with their son? How are they going to handle that? Estate planning is critical. As I mentioned earlier, giving is not an issue. There's no plan. There's no legacy giving. I'm in plan giving, so I love it. But if you're working with a lot of African American families, you look again at wills and who has an estate plan. the numbers are lower for African Americans. So for you all who do this work, there is a charge that you have, really. It's information, education. Inform your supporters, your donors. National Estate Planning Awareness Week, one of my all-time favorite weeks, aside from my birthday week. It's a natural fit for events and educational opportunities, seminars, webinars. We have to inform. Now that you all have heard this information, I think you're really tasked with it in some ways. What you do with it is certainly up to you, but there are a lot of people that need information. And you all can help. You can help share information. So National Estate Planning Awareness Week is a very, very important week. Do community outreach. I am on the board of the Baltimore Estate Planning Council. We've started outreach programs during that week. We go to our Baltimore Department of Aging. We do a virtual webinar. We go into our colleges and universities to share estate planning career options with young folks, growing that pipeline of other folks to come. We do outreach in churches, other community centers to inform folks about plan giving and estate planning. It's critical. Yes?
Aquanetta, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you asked us to save your comment till the end. So I have been in the estate planning realm for 15 years, and I truly had not heard about National Estate Planning Week until this week, or this year. So Rocky Mountain PBS reached out to the Denver Estate Planning Council and said, hey, it's National Estate Planning Week. Can you guys give a presentation? None of us knew what that was. And I'm sorry, like if other people here in this room, it was the third week in October, because we did our presentation on the 23rd. But I don't want to get you off track, but maybe you could talk just for a second more about what that is, because I think a lot of us weren't aware of this, and that's a huge missed opportunity.
It is huge. Thank you for bringing that up. It is one of my favorite weeks. And I'll tell you, I already know when 2025 will be. It's October the 20th through October the 26th. I actually contacted Eleanor, who works with the National Association of Estate Planners Councils, and asked her specifically for the week, for the date. It is a week, it's not a lightweight week. It's a week that has been set aside since 2008 by Congress. A resolution was signed. And it's for Americans to understand and appreciate the importance of estate planning as a part of one's financial well-being. So that should resonate with really all of us in here. And if you can do something to share information in the work that you do, it would be most helpful, as we're all looking to have clients that come in, and you can have assets under management that are growing, but they're unaware of some of the benefits of estate planning and financial well-being. It's not really going to help them. And so therefore, there are a lot of clients out there that you could possibly have that just need a little bit more information. So thank you for pointing out that week. And with that, I could go on with my questions, but I am at this point going to call up Ben and Natalie to take more questions. And if you all have questions at this point, Tanner, do you want to just run the mic if they have questions? Okay, perfect. Anyone with questions for me on the case study at this point? I know I've talked a lot about Peter and Charlotte, but it's open to you now.
Hi, I'm Mary Lou Houston with JP Morgan's private bank and a former estate planning attorney. So you're pointing out the properties. What would you advise in terms of quieting title with those? Like, what would be good first steps for them?
Yeah, to clear those titles, the heirs property titles in particular, there are several groups and organizations, in particular like on the southeastern U.S., and they specialize in heirs property. So there are groups for folks to work through those tangled titles, but obviously those estates need to be probated. Those estates, grandma, grandpa, that were never probated, They're missing out even on a lot of disaster relief benefits, even some farm relief benefits if the titles are tangled. So I would say an attorney who deals with, one, probate administration, estate administration work. So it could be quite a few estates that have to be settled before you can get that title clear. That would be one step. And I have seen families put their heirs' property, once they get somewhat of a clear title to it, in some sort of a trust, so that future generations, they cannot, one person can't opt to sell the property and a partition takes place and they lose the property. So an attorney, speaking as an estate planning attorney, I would say that would be the first stop, would be an attorney to help sort through some of that. I do want to point out one thing, so I'm going to interrupt the questioning for a second. So hold your questions if you have one. But I want to point this out before I end this case study. So this is the 1870 census, a copy of it right here. And as you can see where that yellow arrow is pointing, that's actually a Peter Cade from 1870. And beneath is a Charlotte Cade. Those are my third great grandparents. So this case study is their namesake, but these were actual people. Yeah, and Peter was born in 1803, enslaved, and so was Charlotte. So I just wanted to point that out. So I named this case study after them. A lot of the information that you heard about in the case study, from historical information, family stories. So most of this is not made up. It's real. So there you go. All right, so any more questions? I know I took that off the track for a second, but we're open to questions.
From your experience and perspective, what are some of the challenges that advisors have in kind of understanding the nuances, cultural differences in estate planning and gift planning?
I would say that listening ear, listen to their stories. It's certainly not going to be your story. It's not going to be my story even, per se. But when I go into meetings with donors, I literally listen. Every now and then, they'll have to ask me, Aquanetta, well, where are you from? Because they've been talking the whole time. I want to hear about them. Trust is huge, as you can see from some of the things that have actually occurred to this family. Build a relationship. I'm working for a nonprofit. I've had people ask questions like, well, we want to make sure we're highlighting some of our donors of color. And the first thing I say is you need to be authentic. You don't want to rush out and grab your donor of color and put them on your newsletter without having a real relationship with them. So I would say the approach should be one of listening first. And then you'll get the information you need to do your work. If it's estate planning, financial planning, but do not make assumptions. Hear them out. Because some of the things they're coming to you with, you probably had no idea these things ever occurred to them and their family. And so they're navigating those things as they're sitting there talking to you. So they need to have trust. That's probably the critical word, is trust in their advisors.
Once you get past that area of trust, and I think a lot of us understand that, sitting down, building the relationship with your clients, that EQ, that personal. But if you look at this room, there's not a lot of people of color in this room. So when that comes up, for those of us that don't have the experience, what are some resources? So when my client says to me, I'm very passionate about, the HBCUs, and I go, gosh, I'm not familiar with that. I need to educate myself. So what are the resources? Where should I be looking? And in this community, in Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, we're also going to have a lot of individuals that are of Native American descent that are having similar. Where do we go to find this so that we can be thoughtful and respectful and understand these other cultures?
Yeah, I would say that in the last 4 years or so, we've seen an increase of publications, whether it's books, even webinars or virtual events, where there's a focus on different cultures, whether it's Native American, whether it's Hispanic, Latino, African American. I would say resources such as reading, read as much as you can, get different viewpoints. It's easy for us to just put our blinders on and look one way. And that's why we oftentimes don't recognize that people are coming to us with a background like Peter and Charlotte, because we haven't really opened our eyes. So resources would be read as much as you can. Read something that's not necessarily on your list. Go pick something. Maybe about a Native American story or history or family from another viewpoint. Other organizations that deal with perhaps people from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, you'd be surprised how welcoming many of these organizations would be if they serve communities of color or people from diverse backgrounds. So I would say venture out of your comfort zone. I don't know if you all have different.
I might add, for a client's philanthropic goals, I'd be remiss if I didn't advocate for your local community foundation. But I say that for a couple of reasons, and both as the network of advisors. I mean, there are a lot of smart people in this room, right? And I think community foundations being deeply embedded in community are a way to bring advisors of different kinds, of different backgrounds together. Something we're fortunate to do through our professional advisor council is matchmake, right? And say, here's an attorney who might be able to answer this question from a wealth advisor. I think the other thing about being embedded in community, there's knowledge on the ground about issues affecting different audiences in that community. And particularly also when we work with clients who may have philanthropic interests outside of Metro Denver, the Community Foundation is a strong network of over 450 foundations across the country. And so very much, we're fortunate to have Colorado Gives Foundation here. But we, of course, encounter questions about, hey, what's happening with the rural poor in Jefferson County, right? We're going to pick up the phone and call our colleagues over at Colorado Gives Foundation. Same thing happens across the state, right? So I'd advocate for finding these kinds of convening organizations, right? Be it the Estate Planning Council, be it the Community Foundation, who can help, set that roadmap and help you find those resources.
I would just like to add it's important to, of course, know your client, but then, yes, know your advisors and to stay abreast of things that are going on internationally, because a lot of clients want to get involved on a local basis, but with causes that are also international as well.
And I wanted to add, actually, that I have a lot of knowledge for some reason around what Aquanetta is talking about. I garden and clean my house to various podcasts, a lot around the Centers for Investigative Reporting, ProPublica. They've done a lot around the Gullah Geechee people, around the injustices around farmland, around, unfortunately, very racist farming in the past and lending. So that's how I stay really up to date around injustices. For some reason, as I've gotten older, injustices towards people, cruelty towards animals is something I'm unfortunately hyper-focused on, and I want to get to know everything I possibly can around those so that when I'm in a meeting with somebody and they bring something up, I've heard of something, I can actually share a bit more. Or also, again, all of us come from various backgrounds. You look at us, you have no idea. You have no idea. My father grew up essentially in a basement in a bomb shelter in Hungary during World War II. You'd have no idea that I carry that trauma as well. So I think digging inside and also coming to terms with your own childhood traumas and family traumas just makes you open to being able to discuss these things with your clients.
For me as an advisor, it would be helpful to know who are the grantees, what's going on, who are the nonprofits that you're supporting or that you need other donor support from. Because I think, us as being kind of matchmakers to be able to fulfill that, because I have a lot of clients that may have passions with You know, whether it is religion or ethnic groups or, you know, women and girls sort of nonprofits, just knowing what's out there and who they are, and, you know, provide us with some more exposure to those groups, and then we can respond to that. I think that would be helpful for me. I don't know if other advisors are sort of looking for that as well.
I think, you know, Aquanetta, I love how you sort of said that first conversation, and we all know this, be it in financial services, be it in development, is listening, right? What I love about the second conversation is the asking of questions, right? And I've always thought philanthropy is such a wonderful way for clients to open up and start to talk about their passions and what's meaningful to them, go deeper into their story. And so, Sandra, to your point, you know, I love asking that question of, you know, tell me the story of how you got involved in this board, right? Easy question, but I think it can open up so much. And then, you know, as I've learned from some of the really smart advisors in this room, the next step is then around legacy, right? You've had this long involvement with your church, right? And maybe this is multiple conversations down the road, but what do you want to have happen to that? You know, what kind of, you know, where do you want to see that church in 100 years? And what might that look like for you? And I just think that visioning exercise can be so powerful to really uncover these needs, uncover the motivations, and then start to map to solutions.
When they have multiple recipients of our, you know, philanthropic organizations that they want to give to, how do you counsel them on, do you use the sororities foundation? Do you use the one big foundation to do all the distribution? Or, you know, do you have some thoughts around that or experiences with that?
Yeah, it sounds like a donor advised fund to me.
A lot of times, you know, the sororities, you know, they have their own foundation set up. And so,
yes,
you know,
that is
there's a
correct.
pretty strong connection, as you've already said, with that.
Yes,
So
yes.
sometimes they're leaning that way, but, you know.
Yeah. So you're thinking, should they perhaps focus more on like one or two organizations, or how do they do their giving
Yeah,
more
it's-
efficiently for
Yeah.
all of those different orgs?
the efficiency part.
Yeah. You all that do this work, but from a standpoint of a director of planned giving, a donor advised fund, they're not, with their assets, I don't see a private family foundation at this point for them. So I lean towards a donor advised fund. For the ease of it, everything would be there. They could make their, you know, their grants out. But I don't have any other suggestions to make their giving more consolidated or more efficient. They're all over the place with their giving. And I think if I tallied it up, it was around $36,000, $32,000, somewhere in there a year annually that they give. So there's probably a more efficient way to do that. Any comments on that?
A lot of mine, I'm a CPA by trade, so a lot of it's year-end timing. And some people are talking about getting their families involved, so they want to do a family foundation. There's different complexities to that, so a lot of times it depends on the situation, if the kids even want to be involved. And I just love DAFs because they can contribute then and then decide later, so there's no rush.
I just add, you know, Myra, we've known each other a long time. The answer is always a donor advised fund at the community foundation. I mean, that's just, I mean, but I'll share, I think in our conversations with clients, we think about 3 buckets, right? We think of a donor advised fund as being a really effective tool for giving during lifetime, and particularly consolidation when you have a client who wants to support multiple charities. But we increasingly think of them as less good for long-term multi-generational giving. And so then we might have conversations about various kinds of endowed funds or endowments, say, at the sorority or at the HBCU, right? And I think one lens on that is, what kind of relationship do you and your heirs, your children, your grandchildren, want to have with that charity that was so important during your lifetime? Right? Maybe it is, you know, I think of legacies at different universities, right? Maybe there is that multi-generational institution. I think the third question, so we think about lifetime giving, we think about what happens after death, and then the third question is really, how do you want your children or your heirs or close people who are close to your family to be involved in this philanthropy? And do we need to carve out some resources that they can explore and experience the joy of philanthropy?
So I've been in rooms with privileged white women that have a lot of power that aren't asked a lot of questions, and their voices are not heard at those tables. And you take a woman of color, maybe that's even amplified. So as advisors, what can we do to make sure that we hear her voice, or what are your recommendations to make sure Charlotte is actually heard during these times?
Yeah, that's a great point. For Peter and Charlotte, Charlotte is really the one at this point driving all the giving. So Peter could really care less. So Charlotte is the one who's really involved on boards. She does work with a fundraising committee with her sorority, and she's giving in all these different places. He just goes along with what Charlotte says. So I would say it's been my experience in the African American community, a lot of the giving would actually come from mom or big mama or, so I am going to step out and say, I don't necessarily see that where the woman such as Charlotte would be quiet about it. There are some, so certainly not a monolith, but I don't see that as an issue right now, for Charlotte anyway, and her family. But I hear your point. Sometimes you know there's something more that the woman really wants to do along the lines of charitable giving, philanthropy, but she goes along with what perhaps her husband is suggesting. And that is unfortunate. And of course, you know, now with women in philanthropy, for the future, women are in positions to inherit really twice from their parents. We're in the great wealth transfer currently underway. So there's that inheritance, and then there's perhaps inheritance from a spouse as well. So women will certainly be much more influential in philanthropy going forward, for sure.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.